All right. Good day, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Donalda Gowan-Leverick, and I am the Associate Director of the Center for Integrative Medicine in the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology here at the University of Saskatchewan. And I'm honored to have the privilege of introducing our speakers today. And I also want to express gratitude to the Indigenous elders, the traditional keepers of knowledge on this land of Treaty 6, where we meet today and pay our respects. We have with us, forming this dynamic panel, Dr. Linda Balnaves, who resides in Manitoba, but is joining us today from the West Coast, Dr. Farah Shroff, who is also in BC today, and Dr. Kieran Cooley in Toronto. And it's also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Epstein. He is the Managing Director of our academic unit here at the College of Medicine. And Michael, would you kindly offer a word of welcome as well to our guests online and in this room and in our community?
Sure. Okay. And I'll be very brief. I just want to welcome everybody. I think it's great that we can get together from all these different locations. There is so much happening in the world right now with traditional, complementary, and integrative medicine. And I think it's great, even in the short amount of time that we have. Hopefully, I think this is a huge opportunity for us to learn from these three thought leaders and with and from each other. So I'm going to get out of the way, and thank you, Donalda, for making it happen.
All right, thanks so much, Michael. And thanks so much to our panelists and to our guests online and our guests here in the room. So my first question is going to be directed to you, Farah. Dr. Shroff, you are an independent consultant and a faculty member at the University of British Columbia. And along with your leadership in founding an organization called Health Together, which I know focuses on those who identify as women, young ones, and the environment. But you were also recently awarded a fellowship from the Harvard School of Public Health, and you're currently an expert at the Harvard Innovation Lab. Dr. Shroff, I know that you are also an educator, researcher, practitioner in a variety of holistic health modalities. And I believe that you've prepared a few slides to share with us just a bit about your current research projects. I welcome you to do so now, please, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Donalda, and thank you to all of you for inviting me to this wonderful gathering. It's wonderful to be here with two of my amazing colleagues. And yes, so I'll just talk a little bit about who I am and the work that I do. First and foremost, I'm a practitioner or a sadhaka of holistic practices. My heritage is from India, and since I was a very, very young child, I've been practicing yoga. And I've taught yoga now in more than 60 countries around the world. I've got lots of different kinds of certifications in yoga. One is in Yoga Nidra, which is a very deep form of relaxation. I also teach yoga specifically as a treatment for osteoporosis, based on some randomized clinical trials that a colleague has done. I teach laughter yoga, I teach eye yoga, many different kinds of yoga, but mainly I also practice these things. Every day I practice yoga. I'm also a meditator in the Vipassana tradition, so I meditate twice a day, morning and evening. And it really is the fact that I'm a sadhaka or a practitioner that I see the beautiful impact of holistic practices or complementary alternative practices in my own life and in the lives of my students around the world. I really profoundly believe that these kinds of ancient forms of knowledge can do a huge amount of healing and well-being for people in the modern day. I believe that all of our ancestors had a lot of wisdom to share with us today. And some of the solution to so many of our health and planetary health problems are just listening to that wisdom. And so most of the work that I do now, particularly since I was at Harvard, and I'm continuing to be at Harvard, I'm also on the board of the Harvard Health Lab, as well as the Innovation Lab that you mentioned, is I'm really trying to do very impact-focused health solution work. So all of my research now has a knowledge translation component. So that means any article that I'm publishing, I make sure that there's at least some kind of an infographic, and then that gets sent out on social media. That's the minimum that I do. I try to do some videos, interviews, podcasts, not just the usual academic conferences, because the kind of research that I do is very much focused on solving both individual and collective mental, physical, and spiritual health issues. Um, so I'm just going to share a few slides just because sometimes just seeing it is maybe just a little bit easier to see just what I do. So here we are talking about the relevance and impact of integrative health research. And I am on the lands of the Musqueam peoples. So this slide just sort of shows, it's a very messy slide, sorry about that, just shows a little bit about the kind of work that I'm doing. So I do a lot of work on yoga. I told you this is my daily practice. I love yoga. I initiated a randomized clinical trial to treat osteoporosis. That's happening in Kerala in India. And I've published work on yoga as a treatment for depression. I've done some work with a physician colleague on heart rate variability in yoga. And as I said, I've taught yoga in over 60 countries around the world. I also have a paper called The Joyous Yoni, which is a paper that examines yoga and sexuality, particularly women's sexuality. That one's called The Joyous Yoni, a yogic exploration of women's sexual exaltation. And recently, when I was in Kerala as a visiting scholar at this university called Ames, I just did a workshop on laughter yoga, and and they are now going to start doing a study on laughter yoga because they feel like it will bring more joy to their hospital. And that's the kind of thing that really brings me a great deal of joy, because I feel like after the pandemic, we really are dealing with so many serious mental health concerns, and a little laughter can just go a long way. So I'm going to be quick here. So yoga is one area that I do work on. I published 3 papers on registered massage therapy, which is Canada's #1 form of complementary and alternative medicine. Again, all of those have some KT component to them. I do conceptual work talking about, what does holism mean? What does it really mean to understand mind, body, spirit, wellness? And things on global trends, what's happening. We're seeing an incredible growth all around the world of systems of holistic medicine, particularly as we see decolonization coming along in many countries. Many countries in the global south are unleashing the power of their systems of traditional medicine. I did my PhD thesis on Ayurveda, and UNESCO has recently commissioned me to write their high-level technical piece on Ayurveda. So I'm doing that, and I've done lots of other writing on Ayurveda. And then and the other kind of half of my work is on social justice, but sometimes I bring the social justice and the integrative work together. So yeah, there's a few pieces there. One piece I did on the health of Black, Indigenous, and women of color during the pandemic. Another one on mining justice in Canada, HIV/AIDS. Yeah, I do. So yeah, there's these 2 sides of me. This one side, which is really interested in the mind, body, spirit wellness, and the other side that's really, really interested in getting fairness for everybody. So I'll just quickly say this. So I founded this organization called Health Together. We might be the world's only organization, public health organization at least, that serves to boost systems of traditional medicine like Ayurveda, yoga, and traditional Chinese medicine. And we do education, research, and innovation. And our innovation is essentially to recognize that in most parts of the global south, the vast majority of people are accessing traditional medicine as their frontline care. So here's me at Harvard. You already heard that I do work there. And so that's just, I'm going to stop my share here. I want to talk just a little bit about one of the implementation science projects that I'm working on. I'm really passionate about about women's health. And so I published a paper a number of years ago on symptothermal methods, which is a form of both birth control as well as something that can help people to get pregnant. And it was started by Cherokee and Bantu people. So it's another ancient form of birth control. And I've just started a social venture. So I'm founded a social venture to try to spread symptothermal methods here in Canada, probably, but given the fact this is a shocking reality, 45 to 65% of pregnancies around the world are unplanned. I find that just like unbelievably horrible. And so for those people who are interested in natural, side effect free, evidence based, green birth control, we're really hoping to spread symptothermal methods, which is essentially the cervical mucus. If you know this technique, it's essentially spreading the idea that cervical mucus is an evidence based indicator of fertility. So that's one thing that I'm doing to really get things out there. The last thing I want to say is that much of my work does focus on this idea that well-being happens maybe in a one-to-one setting, which most healing practices do. But the practice that I've invited a Harvard colleague to do with me, Dr. Loomis Hilaire, who's at the Harvard School of Public Health, is one that's a collective project. So this is the Green Collective Wellbeing Project, and we're focusing on 6 practices from around the world that work in groups and that are lodged in cosmological frameworks that see the intimate and intricate connection between human beings and all species. So we will be working with practitioners of Shinrin Yoku, which is a Japanese practice of immersing people in nature. The idea with this project is that we want to show that when people feel healed through some experience with nature, that it will help us to take actions to solve climate injustice. So yeah, that's just a little bit about what I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, I knew this was going to be a challenge in the sense that we're going to be going from one panelist to the next. And I know some of us are madly writing down notes of things that we want to follow up that you've just said, Dr. Schroff, but we're going to have an opportunity to do that when we come back again in our second round. And so thanks so much for sharing the work that you're doing and also your enormous positive energy. It comes through the screen and it is really lovely to hear you speak. So now, if I may, I'm going to move to our second panelist, Dr. Cooley. And so, Dr. Cooley, you are a clinician, educator, researcher in the profession of naturopathic medicine. You're also the past chair of INCAM, a past chair of INCAM, which is the Canadian Interdisciplinary Research Network in Integrative Medicine. And as well as your leadership roles in the field in Canada, you're also a visiting research fellow with the Australian Research Consortium in Complementary and Integrative Medicine. So, Dr. Cooley, my question for you, in the modern world of healthcare, what is the relevance of subjecting traditional or complementary or integrative medicine to critical study as a core topic in national and international public health education and research? And I know that's an area of your expertise, and we're looking forward to your answer.
Such a good question, Donelda. I think from the peaks of healthcare policy all the way through to the trenches
A little louder, just a little
healthcare delivery. Is that better, Donelda?
better. Thank you.
Yeah. So I truly believe that healthcare everywhere continues to be influenced by consumers. Everyone wants access to the best affordable care that meets their needs, and I think we all deserve that. So separating fact from fiction along that journey is critically important to any shared care conversation that tends to incorporate patient values, some clinical judgment alongside quality evidence. And critical inquiry is the basis for that conversation. Without that, we can't move forward. I also believe that scientific evidence is becoming increasingly important at the intersections of regulation, policy, advocacy, and to some extent, medical legal issues. So the credibility of evidence and the strength of the science is paramount to countering misinformation. And the importance of informed care is at the front of mind more than ever while we all navigate these trends seen in consumer behavior that might sometimes unduly favor one's own intuition or severe of influence and and some of the own inherent biases that we all bring to the table. And research in integrative medicine is the keystone in equitable attention to diverse but common public interests, creating open and safe spaces for culturally relevant and effective healthcare decisions. And I think that, again, that critical study informs the makeup of all the curriculum in our schools. So we've spoken briefly about consortiums and initiatives to bring complementary alternative integrative health to conventional medical healthcare schools, to other undergraduate research across the globe, and vice versa. And I think that needs to continue. There's tremendous potential, I think, in helping us all gain a richer appreciation of traditions, both generational and tacit knowledge, as a result of bringing that evidence into the discussion and an open, critical inquiry mindset to that. I'm pretty fortunate through some of my collaborations, especially those at the international level, to gain a greater appreciation for the ripple effects of all of the knowledge creation and critique that can happen as part of scientific inquiry. It's really helped me be a better and more conscientious researcher. It helps form what questions I pose and how I pose them, as well as how I can better frame some of the knowledge that I'm part of creating or sharing down the line. So I hope there's more attention towards that critical inquiry piece for us all.
Yes, thank you. And it's fascinating that you speak to the international aspect of that as well. And as we were having our conversation about consortiums and our desire to get together and our desire to have more opportunity to share what's going on in different locations and different places in the country and places in the world, you exactly bring that point to the forefront, that this is how having these discussions is how we do learn from one another and collaborate to make change. So thank you very much for your treatment of that particular query. And I know that there's lots of follow-up for what you've shared about your area of expertise, and we're going to come back to that again in our second round. And for now, I'm going to move to Dr. Belnaves, please, and thank you. And Dr. Belnaves, you are Professor and Associate Dean, Dean Research in the College of Nursing at the University of Manitoba. You're a past president of the Society for Integrative Oncology and the former deputy director of the Canadian Consortium for the Investigation of Cannabinoids. Now, Dr. Belnaves, in reflecting on your accumulated expertise in traditional and complementary medicine related to decision support for patients and for providers, I would love it if you could tell us, in your view, what has changed over the last 2 decades, 2.5 decades, I think, when I read your bio. Do you have any examples to share of the impact that these changes have had nationally, internationally, or globally on individuals and on communities and on the planet? And I'd love to hear your perspective on that, please.
Thanks so much, Donelda. And you just outed me in terms of my age. So thanks for that. And before we get started, I do want to acknowledge, as we move towards the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, that for the most part, even though I'm in Victoria right now, I live, work, and play on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Innuit, the Assininuit, the Dakota Iote, as well as the Dene. And I'm also on the national homeland of the Red River and Métis people, and that I'm committed in my work and as I live to truly understand truth and reconciliation, understand the harms of the present and the past, and work towards reconciliation in a good way. So I just want to throw that out there. I've made a few notes. If I'm looking to the side, it's not because I'm pondering my life. Just have a few notes here. It's been really interesting. The first thing that came to mind when I was reflecting on this question, and it's something that you just mentioned, is how we're shifting in language and how we're shifting, I think, our paradigms. When I did start doing research in this area 25 years ago, we talked a lot about alternative medicine. And that has really fallen by the wayside. We then kind of moved into talking about complementary medicine, complementary therapies. And that in itself has almost started to fall by the wayside. And what we've really seen come up is, number one, recognition and acknowledgement of traditional therapies. I think a lot of that work has really been spearheaded by the UN and other groups like UNESCO that has really acknowledged that for the majority of the world population, much of their healthcare comes from traditional forms of medicine. And the importance that we don't have an ethnocentric perspective and that we respectfully acknowledge and work with traditional healers and recognizing the important role that those therapies and those traditions play in the well-being of much of the world's population. And I think here in Canada, with the work that we've been doing, particularly around truth and reconciliation with our Indigenous populations, acknowledging the importance that we recognize, embrace, create space to work with traditional healers and individuals that want to include traditional therapies as part of their care. But when we get back to the language, what I've really seen in the last 2 decades is this real movement towards the notion of integration and integrative medicine, which I think is so important because it's really leveling the field. We don't have the same type of, us versus them attitude that was really present a couple of decades ago, where, I was, called the woo-woo person over here doing this very strange research. I'm a witch doctor. I had that being thrown at me a while back. And really, even in the last decade, we've seen this real movement towards integration, where evidence-based therapies, and that comes back to Kieran's points, the importance of research, of how these evidence-based therapies are being taken up and really mainstreamed into our healthcare system. And I really think it's created a much more kind of collaborative approach and united approach, really centered on how we can provide the best care possible to patients, to families, and to communities. And it's really regardless of the paradigm from which they are drawn. And so to me, that's one of the major changes, is that we're really moving away from these separate paradigms, and we're really coming together to just really focus on best care, no matter where our therapies are being pulled from. I also said, as I mentioned, that we're really, trying to be respectful of traditional medicines and how they are incorporated into an individual care plan. And we're seeing healthcare institutions be very thoughtful about creating policies, procedures, spaces in their facilities where traditional medicines can be incorporated. And we're even seeing that within institutional settings like my own university. Just last week, we opened the Pine Lounge for our Indigenous nursing students. And we have a button on the wall so that we can turn off the fire alarm and sprinklers so that smudging and various ceremonies that involve, such things as burning of sweetgrass can actually occur in that setting to create a sense of wellness for our healthcare students. The other thing I think that's really interesting is researchers themselves seem to be moving away from this whole notion of being complementary or alternative medicine researchers. We're seeing, I think, even that in terms of people interested in coming to conferences that are just devoted to complementary or integrative medicine. We're now seeing people say, I'm just a researcher and I'm interested in finding new therapies or developing evidence on therapies that currently exist that are helpful to our patient populations. And so they're more classifying themselves as, I do mindfulness research or I do yoga research, and they're not necessarily, seeing themselves as alternative researchers. They're again, for me, I'm an oncologist, I do cancer care research, and it just happens to be that I'm focusing on therapies that are often not traditionally included as part of conventional care. And so I think that's a real shift. And I think that's a positive shift in the way that, again, it's helping mainstream these therapies. It's getting us away from a divide. And I think we're also starting to speak the same language, which I think can be really useful. The other thing that I've really noticed is outside of Canada is that we have enormous growth in integrative medicine programs, and I'm meaning clinical programs in institutions, and that patients and families, as a result, are getting more options in terms of the types of therapies that they can engage in, make decisions around. What I think is really interesting, especially when you look at the US, is often these programs have been developed as a way of attracting the consumer to their facility. This is seen as an expectation by much of the population that these types of therapies will be available in these settings. And with their structure of their healthcare system, they're wanting to find a way to draw people into their facilities. But I think it also is because it's meeting the care needs, the support needs of people as well, in a way that perhaps some of our conventional care programs could not. And I think what we're also seeing, through research, is that we're ultimately seeing better patient outcomes. And that, is the overarching goal of all of our research, no matter which paradigm we're coming from. And I think as part of this trend is that we're seeing more and more healthcare providers that are actually trained in integrative medicine. We have programs like the University of Arizona Integrative Medicine Fellowship Program. At U of Michigan, we have the Integrative Oncology Scholars Program under the leadership of Dr. Susie Zick. So we're seeing more healthcare providers actually be knowledgeable about these therapies, be able to be conversant about the research that's out there, and being able to have these point of care conversations with patients. And we're seeing less and less stigma and bias around these therapies and these choices as well, which for me, who's been focused on, decision support around these therapies for years, it's really heartwarming that people are able to have these conversations and are beginning to be able to get these supports without feeling kind of ostracized from their healthcare team. However, we do have a ways to go, and I still hear stories of patients that feel like their conversations are being shut down. And that's why I really think, we need to continue to focus on educating our healthcare provider trainees so that they're aware of the research that exists. They're aware of why people are using these therapies and the potential benefits, as well as the potential risks, and are able to have these conversations in a respectful manner. And then lastly, one of the most significant shifts I've also seen is just simply the overwhelming growth in research and high quality research, randomized clinical trials, phase 1 and 2 trials with large samples that are really providing direction in terms of what therapies are evidence-based, where there could be potential harm, and what kind of recommendations we can make across populations. And as a consequence, this is resulting in a larger body of literature that we're able to then summarize and either create systematic reviews, meta-analyses, and I think more importantly, to really get these therapies to point of care is clinical practice guidelines, summarizing the evidence so that both clinicians as well as patients and their families are really able to make informed decisions of what will be helpful, what may not be helpful, and where we still need more evidence, and where you might have to have some comfort in the unknown. And of course, with my SIO hat on, being the former president, I have to mention, just as an example, SIO and its recent partnership with the American Society for Clinical Oncology, ASCO, which is pretty much the world leader in oncology care. And to date, we've now developed 3 guidelines with ASCO focused on integrative oncology, in the areas of pain, anxiety, and depression and fatigue. And several of us were also involved with the ASCO guidelines on cannabis in cancer care. And this partnership not only kind of demonstrates the growing acceptance of integrative medicine, but also recognition of the need that we have to provide guidance to patients. We can't leave them in a vacuum in making these decisions, and recognizing that the literature has gotten to the point where we can create these guidelines. And I really feel it's going to dramatically shift how oncology care is provided and the actual recognition and acceptance of integrative therapies into care settings around the world. So I'm probably well past my 7 minutes that I was assigned. So I'm going to leave it there and look forward to the next round of questions.
Well, really, no worries on the timing. That was wonderful. I want to say the upcoming INCAM symposium in Toronto, Dr. Linda Carlson is going to be speaking about the Society for Integrative Oncology guidelines developed on pain, anxiety, fatigue, and the summary of those guidelines. And Linda, you've woven in, quite a few specific modalities also. So, we're often talking about the populations that are served by the type of work that we're interested in investigating as researchers, and as some of us are doing as practitioners, as clinicians, or teaching as educators. And I know on the call we have experts on mindfulness. We have massage therapists here, and I'm thinking for the institutions that you were speaking about from a consumer draw, those are some of the therapies that are, and yoga therapy, those are some of the therapies that are well represented. Okay, folks, I had an idea to go back to a second round of questions for each of these panelists, but there's been such great information shared thus far that I wonder if it would be fair to give each of the panelists an opportunity to reflect on what's been said so far. I suspect that each of you will have something that you want to add on to or question one another about. And I think that as the audience, that would be incredibly valuable to us. I'm going to put it to you. Dr. Schroep, Dr. Cooley, do you have something? Let's put Linda on the hot seat. And is there something that you want to reflect from what she's shared? That was some really succinct and important information.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to do that. Linda, thank you so much for, I think it dovetailed really nicely with what I was saying about the growth of integrative practices around the world. And I just want to tell you that I have done a lot of reflecting on the balance between recognizing that affordability, accessibility, availability of, say, like traditional birth attendance as one form of practice, it is what a lot of people are accessing. So when people are giving birth, they're going to a TBA. The literature on TBAs, when I started looking at it, it's very sparse and it's quite distressing. I couldn't sleep one night when I read a study that was done on TBAs in a part of Delhi, which showed that one TBA who was not very well trained had a woman it was in an inner city setting, and so the floor was made of brick, and the TBA told the woman to squat, and the woman did her last push, and the baby pushed so hard onto the floor that the baby didn't live to see their first breath. So yeah, just want to talk with you, like, just what are your thoughts on, like, where are we going here, you know?
Yeah, you know what? It's this has to be in partnership. We need to find ways of respectfully engaging, I think, with our traditional healers, our elders, in whatever community you're working in and within, to really explore how do we do this respectfully while still balancing it against risk and safety issues. How do we still uphold choice while still balancing it against evidence? So to me, it has to be kind of a multi-prong approach. One is you have to start the conversation. You have to start creating ways of communicating and navigating this way that's going to be respectful, but also put some limits around it, where that really does privilege the different aspects, people's values, their preferences, but then also safety, medical, legal, like it's complicated. And to me, you really need to find a way of pulling those people together and having those conversations in a respectful manner, And, with my background in decision support, you ultimately have to ensure that individuals are making informed decisions. Um, and that you're creating a safe environment for that to happen. With my background in nursing, I know I have to privilege safety first. And so to me, that's where you have to say, these are our limits. And then what are your limits? And then how do we find a way to put these two together? And, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be some tough conversations around that. And my research program has always been grounded in the fact that as long as we provide, a safe environment, we fully inform with all the evidence that we have, that we reflect on people's values, people ultimately have the right to make the decision that's right for them. And so we have to be respectful of that, as well as people are informed of the risks and benefits. So I don't know if I've answered it, but I gave it a shot.
And I just want to add, Linda, that one of the things that you have communicated over the years that I have just always thought, really made clear sense is that when you're looking at supporting people's decisions, which is, really such an important foundation for discussing the research and discussing the application. But ultimately, as a researcher, you're interested in the study of what people are doing, what they're using. And so very similarly, Farah, I'm speaking about what's going on in around the world. I think that is just really a platform, a street to go down for discussion. And Kieran, similarly, when you were speaking about core curriculum and subjecting these practices to critical evaluation, I think that's something that hopefully not too naively, I think that is something that everyone in healthcare can certainly agree on. And so I'd be interested in your reflections, Kieran, as well, please.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to ask Farah and Linda their experiences, I think, in navigating some of those challenging conversations in a respectful way on both sides, right? So both of you talk about interfacing fairly closely with the conventional world in creation of guidelines or working more closely with practitioners. And when you are faced with some of those difficult conversations, maybe, if you had any tips above and beyond that respectful inquiry and doing, justice, I think, to the full conversation where we can all appreciate the different sides of either the argument, the evidence, the tradition, the different ways that people know and bring that to the conversation. So I don't know that I have any answers. I was just more curious about any stories that both of you had to share or any tips that you might want to relay to this audience.
I would just like to say, I've taught at UBC in the medical school for many, many years. And what I have seen over the past few decades is an increasing trend towards openness in the student body to things like energy medicine, naturopathic medicine, massage therapy. We do get our students to do some projects in this area, and they come back and report on their experiences. And my experience of seeing students do that has been unquestionably a very positive, open-minded approach to seeing what kinds of interdisciplinary collaborations they may have in the future. They know, and I tell them this repeatedly, that if they're going to be practicing in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia, that they are in the epicenter of the nation where people are using forms of natural techniques of any kind. We are a yoga loving nature outdoor crew, right? So and the reality is the med students themselves form part of that cohort. So they're not different from their patients. And then the other trend is that our student body has gone in my short lifetime from being primarily of Caucasian heritage to being a huge mix of South Asian, Chinese, other Asian extractions, some indigenous and some Caribbean, African, and several generations of Black heritage here on Turtle Island. So besides the fact that they're just interested because they live in Lotus Land, they also have a cultural heritage which predisposes them to seeing that practices that their grandparents did, like grandma would give me these herbs and they worked. My throat felt better after it was all scratchy. So I feel like we're living at this perfect moment. Like for those that, if you believe that this is kind of like this perfect time, I'm really excited because I started doing this work a long time ago and I haven't seen a better time for openness. Like one last thing I'm going to say, I sit on the board of governors of the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority, the $7 billion hospital system in the Vancouver area and the coastal area. And we recently started doing something. We have 4 pillars. One of them is planetary health, anti-racism, equity, diversity, inclusion, and Indigenous respect. And on the basis of the planetary health pillar, we started making food that was good for the planet, but it's primarily plant-based food and really tasty, like these Korean sauces and dishes. Like we would never have seen this 20 years ago. Hospital food is the notoriously worst food for you. And now you can eat at the Vancouver General Hospital really healthy plant-based food, which happens to be tasty, like, and from Korea or another culture, like pretty incredible.
Well, I just want to say, Dr. Shaffer, you've just answered the follow-up question that I had specifically for you, and the question was around, or in relation to the theme of the upcoming symposium in Toronto, and it is traditions, transitions, and tipping points. And I wanted to ask you, if you have had witness to some points where there's significant momentum, what have been those small changes that could be considered to make a big impact? And you've just answered it. And twofold for me. One is the openness piece, and the other is actual practices where there's small changes in the body of a pillar of an institution like that to make a big impact. So thank you for that. I do have a follow-up question, if I may, for you, Kieran. And this has to do with tipping points again. And I looked up the definition of tipping point, and this is what Oxford says. Oxford says it's the point at which a series of small changes or incidences become significant enough to cause a larger, more important change. And so I want to ask you, Dr. Cooley, do you feel that integrative medicine as a field of research has experienced such a point, or is it yet to come?
That's a great question, tough to answer. I think I tend to lean towards what Linda was talking about as well, where we are reaching a sort of a place in this world where there is more mainstream acceptance. Over the period of time that I've been researching in the field, seen exponential increases in the volume and quality of research in integrative medicine. There are now multiple extensions specific to integrative medicine research within the Equator Network that shows a real maturation in the field and a better set of levers in place to foster creation of high quality research and for people from all walks to appreciate what is good quality science in this space. So if that's that metric, I think we are becoming more mainstream. We're also seeing lots of awareness in that public space. So Jeremy Ng from INCAM has looked at the amount of attention integrative medicine research receives, and an incredible amount is directed towards natural health products, supplemental foods or superfoods as people turn to this wellness space and preventative care as well. But I also think that if you're thinking about this tipping point, there's as a sense of reduced uncertainty about safety and risk in comparison to the effectiveness. There's a subset of healthcare providers that are there or nearly there with many of the therapies that are under that umbrella of integrative medicine. But I do think that there's still issues that persist. So at the high level, you have the World Health Organization's traditional medicine strategy. So the new strategy is being launched in 2025. And there's a very clear call in it for the need to bring a closer awareness of integrative therapies into nationally represented healthcare systems. And so the extent that they're putting the call out for this just to me demonstrates that there is a lot of mountain left to climb. And as a researcher, I'm really excited about the adventure that lies ahead that's part of that, and very grateful to be part of that. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Mhm. Farah, did you have a question specifically for Karen?
Sure, I would love to talk with you a little bit about naturopathic medicine, Karen. I designed and taught the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine's first course in public health. So I'm a great ally and friend of naturopathic medicine. I believe that naturopaths have a really big toolkit, and I believe that's one of the greatest strengths of the profession. So I wanted to just reflect on one of my worries for the profession right now in 2024. And it's similar to the worry of Ayurvedic practitioners around the world and other practitioners of natural medicine. And it's based on the reality that so many people who practice natural medicine for a living, hang their shingle up as a practitioner of natural medicine, often wanted to go into allopathic medicine first. They wanted to become an MD. They wanted to wear a white coat, and they wanted to be called doctor in the MD tradition. And what we're seeing now here where I live on the West Coast, I live in that pocket, the Lotus Land pocket, and we're seeing so many naturopathic physicians, and they're competing with each other so much that many of them are going into aesthetics. And now that they've got the opportunity to dole out antibiotics, they're doling out a lot of antibiotics. And yeah, it's just sometimes I have a concern about where our fields are going, where our practitioners are heading. Like I wrote a book in 1997. I edited a book about midwifery, where I thought midwifery was going to be able to change Canada's landscape towards a more patient-centered model once it got enfranchised. That book came out in 97. I was asked to update it recently. And I haven't seen midwifery go towards changing the healthcare system. In fact, they're just becoming more like mini physicians. And so I have these worries that people are moving away from their original practice models and their original strengths. Yeah, wondering what you think.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up and asking a great question. I think you're not alone in sort of expressing concerns around the drift away from our roots, those foundations that maybe bring are the strength of many traditional medicine systems. And then at the same time, we're faced with the need for a healthcare to evolve. And some of the crisis that we're maybe facing in Canada or at the global landscape is maybe a lack of attention to addressing needs that exist out there. Now, you gave two examples that maybe are less about addressing like critical needs of a large body of the public, perhaps. But I do think you have to find that fit for yourselves between being authentic to the roots and the traditions, have a respectful and critical inquiry in where those come from and how valuable they are to your identity as a healthcare provider, as a member of that guild, but also in giving your patients the best care that you possibly can. And yeah, I hope we're not maybe the only profession that's asking these questions about ourselves or concerned about it. I hope that in the conventional world, there's a sense in nursing medicine around this attention to drift around who we are and and staying true to the philosophies that brought us to the table and served us so well for many years. So I don't know if I answered your question, but Linda, maybe thoughts to add to that?
No, I was just going to add that half our nurse practitioners that are graduating in Manitoba are talking about moving into aesthetics. So it's not, I think, an issue that's just within the integrative medicine realm. I think our society's been shifting. Our healthcare system is fiscally strapped. And I think, there's a real struggle around people finding their roles, having a secure employment. And so I think people are having to be creative, but I think you raise an important point, Farah, about us not losing track of what our purpose is, what our skill sets are, what our competencies are, what our scope of practice are, no matter where we come from. Yeah.
Wow, I'll tell you, what a dynamite conversation, and I didn't see that coming. I didn't see that direction in terms of the drift, the question around authenticity and meeting needs, both as a community of practitioners. And I also hadn't really thought about, what happens when you get a group of people together who have some experience, maybe a decade or 2.5 or 3, and there's an opportunity to look back, as you said, Farah. That didn't go where midwifery didn't go where I thought it might go. And we're now able to do that. Those of us that have been in this for 2 decades or 3 decades or longer. Similarly, we might say, some of the other professions. And then we have some other topics. We have mindfulness that's doing a different thing entirely. And how is that? How is that the case? What a fascinating discussion to tease that apart, to say, how is this going, and looking back over the decades. That is something we need to pursue, a couple of those topics wholesomely. I do have, if I may, a follow-up question for you, Linda. And I'm back on this idea of the tipping point because it's a theme for our symposium coming up. So my own understanding of a tipping point is it's a moment in time whereby a relatively small change makes all the difference. And I like that idea. And I was thinking about our changing seasons here. And so the small change can be when the air and the ground temperature just drops in a day in Saskatchewan from 3 degrees to 0 degrees. And we say hello to snow and a very long winter. It's a small change, but it makes an incredible difference in our lives. So what do you feel are the biggest challenges to the scholarship of integrative medicine? And we've been talking about scholarship, and by that I mean using research to get a good understanding of traditional complementary integrative medicine, or we may scrap all of those terms and decide to change the conversation, change the terminology. But if that is the case, you've got expertise in knowledge translation and policy. Are there small changes that could make all the difference now?
Yeah, and I'm going to really ground it in Canada because, the world is a big place to try to address. But, the first thing that came to mind, and maybe this is me with my ADR hat on and, sitting at the Senate executive at U of M and hearing about where things are going in Canada related to research. And number one, our biggest challenge is funding. Our healthcare funding envelope has not significantly increased, I would say, for over a decade. And without an increase in funding, and this is for all healthcare research, Canada is really risking falling behind other nations, including in the field of integrative medicine. Studies are getting more and more expensive to run. Clinical trials are getting more expensive to run. And if our funding envelope stays the same, it means less research is going to be funded. And the reality is, and I've sat, and I'm sure others around the room have as well, have sat at review panels. And when you're trying to fight against a chemotherapy protocol or a new immune therapy protocol and a yoga therapy, and the majority of your your reviewers are conventionally trained, guess what's going to come out on top? Because they have a lack of familiarity and understanding of what they're looking at. So to me, funding is the first one. And the other thing that I've been saying for absolutely years, and I always harp on it every time I have to fill out a how was your review experience with CIHR, is that we need a devoted institute for integrative medicine, just like the NIH does in the US. We don't have that. They keep arguing that integrative medicine is a cross-cutting theme across the various disease-specific institutes, but I really feel that does a disservice to a very large field. And I would love to see movement on that. And that's not a little change. That would be a massive change. And, you know, if we can't get the increased funding, it's going to be hard to convince them that we need our own institute and all the infrastructure that goes around it. But I do think it would make a huge difference, because when we look at some of the major trials that are coming out, a lot of them are coming because of the funding that goes towards, you know, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Medicine in the US. The other thing I think we have to think about, you know, with our fiscally strapped healthcare system, you know, we're seeing so much of the emphasis of just keeping the ship afloat. And in many institutions, this is resulting in research that's falling by the wayside, or something that's really done off the side of people's desks. You know, and I've personally been experiencing this lately, just trying to even get a research trial up and going, one that comes with funding. And it's just really not met with a lot of enthusiasm. It's seen as adding to people's workload, you know, practitioners that are already highly burdened. And I've also heard comments like, I'm not here to do your job, which I think then reflects a larger failure of policymakers and leaders to see research as an integral part of a healthcare institution. That you can't improve care, you can't make care more efficient, effective, cost effective, better outcomes if you don't have research going alongside the care you're providing. And so that's a mentality that we have to change, you know, at the highest level, and also at the level of our trainees. We don't do a great job when we're training our physicians and our nurses. I would say maybe some of our complementary medicine, integrative medicine practitioners, that research should be part of your role. Research is something that you will be tapping on the rest of your career, and the importance of supporting it, engaging in it, doing it as part of your practice. And so that's something that I think we need to change. And that in the end will open hopefully more space for integrative medicine to actually happen. And so that's where we have to really work with, you know, our leaders. And then lastly, I always go back to this, and people that know me know that I always bring this up. It's just stigma around integrative medicine. It still exists. And to me, we have to start moving in that direction, where we're not doing small observational trials, that we're able to create these phase 2 and phase 3 trials, creating research that can't be ignored, and focusing not only on mortality and morbidity, which is kind of the currency of most of our trials in Canada, but also including, you know, patient-reported outcomes and cost effectiveness. We need to be embedding that in every clinical trial we do, to get the policymakers, the decision makers, the healthcare leaders to look at the work that we're doing, to say, we're going to save you money, we're going to get people out of the healthcare system sooner, we're going to prevent them from coming back, and that they're going to be healthier as a population. As a consequence, they're going to be back at work, they're going to be doing the things that they want to be doing in our society. You know, so we hopefully, you know, can move the thermometer on that, you know, and really creating advocacy activities around the evidence-based cost-effective therapies, so that we can really push forward policies, you know, change in reimbursement policies, so that, you know, these therapies can actually be taken up into our Canadian healthcare system. So sorry, that was a long answer, but I had a lot of things to try to share.
That was a great answer. So in our final few moments, I'm going to put it back to our other panelists too. Reflections on what's been discovered, or what has been discussed thus far, Farah, or do you have a rapid fire take home message for our learning community, related either to what's been discussed so far or something new?
I feel like we are at a tipping point, and I'll just raise the Ayush ministry in India as one example. It's been 500 years where research on Ayurvedic medicine has been frozen in India, and that's largely because of colonialism. And we're living at a time when finally there's now a whole ministry, not devoted just to Ayurveda, but Ayush stands for Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy is in there as well. Naturopathic medicine is also in there. It all kinds of squishes in there. Yeah, I do work with the Naturopathic College that was founded by Mahatma Gandhi in Pune in India. So it's a very, very exciting time in a country like India. I've done talks like the CME, the continuing medical education talks for like Uganda's there are 120 OBGYNs, and they've wanted me to talk about traditional systems of medicine. I give them a list of a long things I could talk about, and they want to talk about traditional medicine. And in a country like Uganda, the data, I don't know, I don't have the exact numbers, but when I was doing the talk, I found it something like really huge differences. If you were looking for an allopathic practitioner, it doesn't matter, not specialized, just could be a family doc, it was something like 10,000 Ugandans per practitioner. But for a traditional medical practitioner, it was something like 250 to one practitioner. So we're looking at a world now where people are open to doing this, and the time is right politically to be doing it, where anti-racism and decolonial movements are growing, and people just realize that the pragmatics of this makes sense. It's just meeting the triple aim. It's going to meet better health for better care for better cost. Plus, it's green. It's just a really great, right moment for systems of traditional medicine around the world.
Thank you. Brilliant answer. Thank you so much. Dr. Cooley, I understand that you're going to be sharing more about your research at the InChem Symposium coming up here in Toronto. Can you give us a really quick and dirty rundown of the projects you're going to be sharing about?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity to give a solid plug for some great stuff that's on display. InChem's a tremendously wonderful community. Come to the conference if you're not already registered, and if you are, stay excited for more conversations like this. I was part of a group at the RAND Center that helped to create a checklist to promote health equity in research, and we came across this project as a belief that integrative medicines could help prioritize and integrate health equity considerations across the stage of the research process. So we kickstarted this initiative by developing a checklist that hopefully can be used as a guide and we can refine further. I'm going to share a little bit about the process that the World Naturopathic Federation went through to train their workforce in creating a series of umbrella reviews of natural therapies that took place during the pandemic. And I'll present a little bit of a review of findings on mindfulness interventions for post-traumatic stress disorder that was commissioned by a Canadian funder looking to advance what's known about how we can help veterans and families help veterans and families of veterans in Canada. So those are a couple of projects that I'm involved in. Okay. Sorry about the volume.
That's excellent. Thanks. Hey, well, I asked Linda this final question. Can somebody put into the chat, Kieran, are you able to put the link to the research symposium site if you could? I'd be grateful if you, because I know there's no point in putting these things in the chat when everyone isn't on board, because they just wouldn't be able to see them. So Linda, my final question for you is, can you give a lightning speed synopsis of your current research portfolio?
Well, I'm on the dark side of 50, so I'm looking towards retirement sooner than later. So my research has not been as active. However, I'm dabbling in some research looking at psilocybin for existential distress among advanced cancer patients and end-of-life cancer patients, which is really exciting, as well as working with colleagues, Linda Carlson out of the U of Calgary on a mindfulness app that has been funded, the study's been funded, and we're trying to launch the trial across institutions in Canada. And I'm still a big part of SIO guideline committee, and so we're working towards developing the next round of guidelines in that area. So, and I'm also dabbling in doing some training of our healthcare providers around cannabis. And we've developed a cannabis simulation training program that's just going to get evaluated hopefully this year.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. Well, folks, we are at our time. We made a tough decision when we were creating this panel that we were going to keep the time down to an hour. Our rationale being that we are often suffering from information overload and stressed time commitments. And I know there's going to be everyone on the call is going to say this wasn't long enough. We needed more time to hear from each of our panelists and to have some discussion with our community that's online and our community here in the room. But we're going to say that we'll leave on a note where we know that we want to have more conversation. There's lots of folks that saying precisely that there is a need for more conversation. And I want to thank you all so much. Yes, I want to thank you all so much for being here, those of you who came online, those in the room, and I can't thank the panelists enough for the time and the effort in sharing your expertise. And Michael, thank you very much for your direction in the Center for Integrative Medicine here. So I will bid you all a good day and say thanks again for coming. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.